hopefully everything is alright with that. And this concludes our newscast for now, as we will be turning over to the trial for the case of Nitaris v. Drug Co. As a quick briefing for any who have not been following this case, California resident Tyra Nitaris is suing the pharmaceutical company Drug Co. for damage to her roommate, Cheryl Zardis. Earlier this month, Zardis fell into a coma from an overdose on Sombrevent, a prescription sleep medication patented by Drug Co., and Nitaris believes that the drug's advertising is responsible for this tragedy. With the case now going to trial, it appears that the ethicality of direct-to-consumer advertising will once again come under question. With that said, we'll now be turning over to the trial. We will definitely be getting some good footage from that. Where truths are revealed, where justice is dealt, where we conduct high-octane court battles that mystify attorneys, witnesses, and judges alike. This is Court Turnabout. Court is now in session for the case of Nitaris vs. Drug Co. The prosecution is ready, Your Honor. The defense is ready, Your Honor. Excellent. The prosecution will now make its opening statement. The victim fell into a drug-induced coma after overdosing on one of Drug Co.'s prescription sleep medications. It was the only medication she was taking at the time. We believe it was the drug's advertising that influenced her to do as such. And the defense's counter. The events that befell Miss Zardis, while tragic, were not due to this pharmaceutical company's advertising. Very well then, we shall continue. The prosecution may call its witness. In order for this court to get an accurate picture of this case, they must understand the concept of direct-to-consumer advertising. So the prosecution calls advertising expert Eagle Schneider to the stand. State your name and profession. I am Eagle Schneider, a freelance advertising agent. I give advertisers ideas on what to put on their promotional material. I have worked with the pharmaceutical companies in the past, so I also happen to be well versed on the topic of direct-to-consumer advertising. So, expert, testify to this court as to what constitutes direct-to-consumer advertising. Direct-to-consumer advertising, or DTCA for short, is what we call the practice of marketing drugs directly to the consumer. They can be prescription or over-the-counter drugs, it doesn't matter. This sort of thing wasn't always allowed, but that policy changed in 1997. Now you can see drug commercials appear just about anywhere. The Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, sets the guidelines for what is acceptable in a drug advertisement. Those are the basics to DTCA, I would say. The basics? Indeed, this information is the foundation of DTCA. Without it, nothing else on the topic makes any sense. Fine then, Mr. Wright, you may now cross-examine the testimony. Yes, Your Honor. Aside from the consumer, who else were these drugs marketed to? For the sake of the court, of course. Why, to physicians, of course. That was what pharmaceutical companies did before DTCA was allowed in its current form. They would send their drug information to doctors after they were approved. This is true. I believe the information is published in a manual. Correct. The physician's desk reference, it's called. And drug companies pay to get their drugs in the book, and the book is shipped to doctors for free. It sounds like an easy way for doctors to stay informed of the latest advancements. So, what happened in 1997? I thought you would never ask. In 1997, the federal government passed the Food and Drug Administration Modernization Act. Before the act was passed, the drug companies had to include a lot of information about their drugs in the advertisements, so much that it couldn't all fit into a television commercial. Now that the restrictions have been relaxed, well, it became much easier to air a drug commercial on TV. Yes, that. Now define anywhere. Anywhere refers to any type of medium. From print ads to radio and television ads, DTCA is very common these days. I know what you mean. It seems like there's a new drug every commercial break. Thankfully, it is regulated. So, what are these FDA guidelines for drug advertisements? Also, does the FDA control advertising for every drug? First off, no, the FDA only regulates advertising for prescription drugs. OTC advertising is regulated by the FTC, which are over-the-counter and the Federal Trade Commission. Now, when a new drug is approved by the FDA, the company and the FDA have to agree on the drug's labeling. Labeling? Labeling. The full prescribing information. It contains things like the drug's name, the dosage, the active ingredients, side effects. You get the picture. Anyways, the FDA evaluates promotional material for drugs to ensure that it is consistent with the official labeling. So with the FDA running things, it's unlikely that any bad advertising can get through. Not exactly. The FDA doesn't receive near the amount of funding it needs to do its job as well as people think it should. Total funding for all FDA programs is less than half of what pharmaceutical companies spend on just their advertising campaigns. The lack of funding leads to a lack of function, as is evident in the recent decline in the FDA's regulatory action. With the decrease in regulation, the credibility of DTCA suffers. This is not the only problem with DTCA, however. Your Honor, I request that the expert testify on these issues. Objection! This trial is for the case surrounding Miss Zardis's overdose. A discussion of these issues would be irrelevant to the case. Overruled. As the prosecution stated earlier, an understanding of DTCA is needed to understand the case. The expert will testify. Yes, Your Honor. If I let this next testimony go unchecked, things will not go well. It looks like I'll have to fight the expert on these issues. Indeed, there are many common complaints with DTCA. One theory states that advertising drives up healthcare costs since the prices on the drugs are increased to cover advertising expenses. There's also a complaint concerning the age-appropriateness of advertising content. The main issue, though, is the effect of advertising on public health. Some argue that DTCA is responsible for over-medicating the public. The constant talk of symptoms and exaggeration of disease risk cause people to seek drugs when they are not needed. Due to this, it can be said that DTCA provides little actual health benefit. Some even say that DTCA is linked to a higher rate of off-label usage. My, that is certainly a lot of issues. Incidentally, the merits of DTCA do happen to be among the most controversial health-related topics out there. In some circles, this topic is very hotly contested. Very well then, Mr. Wright, your cross-examination. Do you have definitive proof that advertising increases healthcare costs? I do not. It is just a theory. And for every theory, there is another theory that runs counter to it. In this case, it could also be argued that DTCA reduces healthcare costs, as this business angle that advertising adds to the industry encourages competition between companies, thus lowering prices. That is one way to look at it. So what is this issue with age appropriateness? Erectile dysfunction. Due to the nature of this condition, advertisements for drugs that treat it are considered to contain sexual content. Add to that the fact that when the ads are broadcast, there is a high probability that children will be watching, and you've got a controversy. What? How often does this happen? Over a 4-year period, there were a total of 100 billion erectile dysfunction advertisements shown to American children under the age of 18. Outrageous. It is true that DTCA causes an increase in usage of the drugs promoted, but can you determine whether the differential is made of people who need or do not need the drugs? Honestly, it could work either way. I don't have any solid evidence on that. And furthermore, couldn't one also argue that DTCA educates the public, allowing them to be more informed on matters related to health and treatments, and to detect symptoms earlier, possibly leading to improved treatment outcomes? I suppose you could say that. Now, elaborate on this off-label usage. Off-label usage is a term that describes the usage of drugs and methods different from that which is directed by the patient's physician. A common type of off-label usage is overdosing, which is precisely what happens to the victim in this case, is it not? It is. Wait. Objection! The expert claims that advertisements promote off-label drug usage. Although it might be true in some cases, in this case, it is false. How do you explain this, Mr. Wright? I present as evidence the Sombrevance commercial. I ask that the court listen closely. I can't sleep. What? Huh? Salamence? Chrysalia? What are you two? Hi, we heard you were having problems doing the lunar dance. Which is sleeping, by the way. But you're not alone. Every night, millions of Americans have to deal with the same problem. It's so sad. But what can I do about it? If I were you, I would ask my doctor about Sombrevance. It's a prescription medication that can get your sleep schedule back on track. Wow. Side effects include dizziness, drowsiness, dry mouth and throat, amnesia, headache, stomach pains, and weakness. Do not consume alcohol in conjunction with Sombrevance. Do not drive or operate heavy machinery while under the effects of Sombrevance. If used in patients with depression, depressive symptoms may worsen. All sleep medications carry risk of dependency. Be sure to notify your doctor if any changes occur while using Sombrevance, and only use Sombrevance as directed. Do the lunar dance with Sombrevance. From Drug Co. Though Mr. Snyder's testimony claims that this commercial drove Miss Zardis to overdose, the commercial specifically states otherwise. Only use Sombrevance as directed. Clearly a contradiction. Yeah. Objection! While this Sombrevance commercial may not be the immediate cause of the victim's overdose, it could have still been a factor. Objection! That ad had been airing for several months before the victim even received the prescription. There has to have been a different reason why Miss Zardis overdosed. Oh really, Wright? Do you have proof? I have proof. Fine then, show us the decisive evidence that proves your claim. Take that! These medical records prove that the victim was mentally stable enough to take the medication. Because of the risk the medication posed to depression patients, there was a psychological evaluation done. They wouldn't just give this drug to someone who would overdose at the drop of a hat. Objection! It still doesn't explain why she overdosed in the first place. Objection! The fact still remains that something trivial like a drug commercial would not have caused such an event, and though the true motive still remains a mystery, the defense has proven beyond doubt that Drug Co.'s advertisement is not the culprit. Ah. Well done, Mr. Wright. You've won the case. I did. Now the verdict, Your Honor. Wow. Mr. Edgeworth, are you sure you're alright? It's not like you to give up this easily. Yes, Your Honor. I can assure you that I am quite alright. If only we could say the same about the person who wrote this script. I mean, seriously, do they even know me? I see what you mean now. Anyway, the plaintiff's claim will be dismissed. Therefore, this court finds the defendant, Pharmaceutical Company Drug Co., not guilty.